what's up you guys, The Curious Owl here, and today I have my March wrap-up. So I was planning on doing this a little bit earlier in the month than I did. I was hoping to get this out April 1st, but that did not end up happening. But nonetheless, I still managed to get everything I wanted to have read in March done. And as you guys can tell, I have a little bit different of a setup in terms of my camera because I kind of bit the bullet and decided to finally get myself a new camera for myself. I've been basically limping along my camera I've had for the last couple of years, and I finally just decided to get myself something new. So I did get a Canon G7X Mark III. I love this so much so far. I really am excited to see how it is when I go through and edit videos, but I hope that the quality of the videos looks a lot better than what I had before. Not to say that my camera before wasn't that great. It was actually really good for what I needed, but I decided to upgrade and I decided to go for one I have heard so many people say is a really, really good camera, especially for sit-down videos and vlogging and all that stuff. So anyway, with that aside, let's get into the stats for March's reading. So in March, I did complete a total of 11 books, and I did have one DNF over the course of the month. But in terms of statistics, we had 3,098 pages read in the month and 0 minutes worth of audiobooks. This is so far my highest amount of pages read in a given month, so I think that this was a really good step up because I think in March I really buckled down and was able to get a lot of stuff read after having been kind of in a slump almost for the first couple months of the year, but I think I'm finally past that and I'm really excited to see where my reading goes now. But then I ended up having 7 of those books be physical books, and the other 4 that were completed were all ebooks and no audiobooks, and 7 of the books I read were from my personal library, either physically or on my Kindle, and the other 4 were borrowed. So in this month, in terms of star ratings, I did have 4 5-star reads, 5 4-star reads, and then 2 3-star reads, as well as, like I said earlier, a DNF. Let's get into the books I ended up reading this month. So the first one was completing the book for Brandy from Books with Brandy Shanae's book club read for February, which was Night Crawling by Layla Motley. This was a 5-star read. I loved this book. It is a very heavy book to get into, though. It is something that really speaks to specifically how women of color are forced in some ways when it comes to providing for their families, go really far distances. And not only just women of color, but in general with women, how easy it is to get sucked up into a world that is not good for you. Essentially, this is a story that is loosely based on an actual case that had happened in Oakland, California a handful of years ago, where there was a young woman who was still a minor at the time but had become a prostitute and was bounced around from a lot of different people throughout the Oakland Police Department. I'll leave the article for it down in the description. You guys can go check it out for yourself, and if you read Night Crawling, it very easily is understandable how the story was created. It almost pretty much outlines the idea of leading up to that article, like what could have possibly happened, but it's not necessarily based on the real person. It is more so Layla Motley's story of what does she think if she was to think of a person that would be in that situation and have that exact, ending, what happened leading up to it. Next, I ended up reading the Zora Neale Hurston read for February, which was Mulebone. This is another group that Books with Brandy Shanae does, this time with Bree from Bree Cherie Reads. It is a Zora Neale Hurston read-along where we are reading a large collection of her work over the course of this year. And like I said, February was Mulebone. Now, this was really interesting. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. And this is specifically a book that is a play. The thing you have to keep in mind with Zora Neale Hurston work is that if you're reading it, it's from a very different time frame. Zora Neale Hurston was an author that really took the world by storm in the first half of the 20th century. We're talking like 1920s-ish, 1930s to about the 50s or 60s was when I believe her career was really at its peak. And this is one of the most controversial, if you will, kinds of pieces, because this specifically too was with Langston Hughes, who I guess they may have had some kind of a relationship at one point, or like they may have been lovers possibly, but at the very least they were friends who worked together on this story in particular, and there was a lot of backlash around it because then the two of them got into a feud. There's a lot of history with this, and it's fascinating if you go and research it on your own, but the play itself was actually really interesting because it's all about these two guys who essentially in this town are fighting over the same woman, and it's a lot of the story really about the town and how they see the whole thing happen, but then you get to see the two guys with the girl and how that whole thing tears them nearly apart, and the fallout that there is with that fighting and what happens to the both of them. It was just a really cool story, but I do feel like that for me, the language of it did trip me up a lot. I had to really slow down and take my time with reading it because purely it is in a dialect that I am not familiar with. It is in a very older dialect of African American vernacular English that is not within my wheelhouse. So it did take me a lot longer to read this than I probably would have had. And I did feel like that because of the language, I got really tripped up with a lot of what was going on partway through the story. But overall, it was a really, really cool story. I really liked the idea of it. It was really simple, but it was really effective. And I just really liked the way that these characters kind of came around, and by the end of it, how everything became resolved. It's definitely worth a look to see exactly how writing was back in the day for especially topics such as about Black people. It was really, really interesting. Definitely recommend at least checking it out if you have the ability to. The next book I tried to read was my DNF for the month, which was the first book in the, what is it, Lily Alder series or something like that, and it's The Body in the Garden by Catherine Shellman. I just felt that this was way too similar to the Countess of Harley mysteries. Like, literally the first book, The Body in the Garden, almost has a completely exact setup that was for the first book in the Countess of Harley mysteries, and I really just disliked that. I ended up DNFing it about 60% of the way through because at a certain point I just got really bored, and I really honestly truly felt like I was just reading somebody else's like plagiarized version of the Countess of Harley mysteries. It was just beyond mind-boggling. Next book I read though was my first 5-star for the month, and that was Unlock Your Storybook Heart by Amanda Lovelace. This is one of my Wheel of D20 reads, so you can go check out the vlog for that. But this is Amanda Lovelace's newest poetry collection. I have specifically the Target edition, which has some differences in terms of the cover and some of the content involved in it, but I will never not love an Amanda Lovelace poetry collection. This one in particular is the third and final installment in a series that she has that is called the Princess series. It's a princess series. The women are some kind of magic. That's what it is. And specifically, each of these collections deals with a different Disney princess in the sense that it is what inspires the poetry collection. This one in particular is inspired by Beauty and the Beast, and there is a lot of trigger warnings with the poetry that is in this, which is mentioned up front in the very beginning, so definitely take advantage of looking at that trigger warning list. But absolutely beautiful. Belle is one of my favorite Disney characters, and so the fact that I got to read this, not even knowing firsthand what this collection was going to be about, and being surprised to find that this is a Beauty and the Beast inspired collection, and how well it was done in terms of adapting Belle to a more modern sensibility and really playing on the actual trauma that she goes through in the story of Beauty and the Beast. Like, I just fell in love with this like I fall in love with all of Amanda's work. So 5 stars. Not a surprise to me. The surprise to me though was my next read, which was my another Wheel of D20 pick, which was City of Bones by Cassandra Clare. Again, I'm gonna have more of my thoughts on this in my Wheel of D20 vlog, but this was a reread for me after having put this series down for a long time. I think it's been like 5 years at least since I've read this series for the first time. I did not expect to like this as much as I did. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I was actually pleasantly surprised with how much I really enjoyed this read of it, because every time I thought about this book and I thought about this series, this book just did not stand out to me, and that it just felt really weird and icky, and there were some weird and icky icky parts, which were supposed to be weird and icky, but this overall was not as bad as I remember it being, even for being a younger, like, YA story, like, being a 2010s YA book. This was not really that bad, and I'm actually more enticed to actually complete the series, because this is one of the books on my finishing series list that I had, and I'm excited to say that I would be looking forward to reading more of this series again, and maybe even continue with reading the entire rest of the world that I have right here behind me. Next is another Wheel of D20 read, and that was The Sea of Monsters by Rick Riordan. This is the second book in the Percy Jackson series. I did give this a 4 out of 5 stars as well. I liked it. I feel, though, that I really missed the luster and the magic that was with the series from when I was a kid. I think I definitely would hands down love this series when I was, you know, a teenager, in middle school, you know, anything like that. But I think that now as an adult, it's just very kind of mundane. It doesn't feel really that, you know, crazy, and I just don't appreciate some of the ways that the characters interact. I don't care for Grover. Grover is a character I feel like is absolutely unnecessary, and his entire storyline within this was almost completely not needed. I would have actually preferred it if he had stayed, as opposed to having to go on some quest that gets talked about in this one. I just feel like there was really no point to it, and so it kind of was meh in terms of that, but I did still really like a lot of what this was doing. I didn't expect, though, that this was going to continue the storyline of the Titans and how that was, you know, impending and coming and all these things, and so I was really surprised that I didn't expect that, but I was, you know, happy to see it. I think that that's a really good continuity, because all of Rick Riordan's books and the books that he has within his publishing company have a line of continuity, even if the individual adventures are different, and so I really did enjoy that. But 4 out of 5 stars, not too bad. Not finding anything that is, like, absolutely stellar as of yet, but I would like to then also continue the series. The next book I read was The Stone Sky by N.K. Jemisin. This was our read for March for the N.K. Jemisin read-along, which I am hosting in the entirety of 2023. Not joined us as of yet. We have just finished the Broken Earth trilogy, and we'll be starting a brand new series of N.K. Jemisins in April, so you definitely have an ability to come and join us in without having missed too much. Also did have a vlog dedicated to this book, but overall, I was a little disappointed with how this series ended. I did give The Stone Sky a 4 out of 5 stars, but I really was disappointed in my overall reaction to this series. I was hoping that this book would be much more of a bombastic kind of ending, and that it would be much more explosive and fun and crazy, and it wasn't. It was very traumatic, but it wasn't traumatic in the way that I felt absolutely heartbroken over. I feel like this was a series where the first book was absolutely wonderful and I loved everything that was getting set up, and then I lost a lot of the magic and the luster as the books went on, and that's okay. They all can't be winners, so I am, though, looking forward to reading her next series that we're going to be getting into in April. Next, though, was another reread for me, which was Babel by R.F. Kuang. This was Brandy's pick for her membership book club for the month of March. Absolutely loved this all over again like I did the first time, and it was so interesting because I actually feel like I picked up on a little bit more than I did the first time I read it, so I can't ask for more than that. I love this book so much. It was my #1 favorite book of 2022, continues to be a favorite of mine, and I already want to go back and reread it again. Next, though, was another 5-star read, and this one was traumatic and heartbreaking, and I cried and cried and cried. And it was another Wheel of D20 read, which was A Monster Calls. I sobbed with this book. It is so sad. It is so short. The audiobook is like 2 hours long on double speed, so it's like a 4-hour audiobook. This was so beautifully done. This is a story that is about a young boy who knows that his mother is basically dying of cancer. And in the story, he meets this tree monster that essentially says, I'm going to tell you 3 stories, and then after that, you need to tell me a story that is of your truth, of what it is that you're trying to hide, and tell me what it is that is actually true in your world. They're not supposed to be lessons per se, the stories that the monster tells, but they are impactful to the main character, Connor, and you basically just see this poor kid as he's living his life, knowing his mother's dying, and everything else seems to be falling apart around him. Things are not going the way that he wants. He doesn't know where he is in his life, and he's in a very formative time of his life where he's 13 years old and losing his mother. And for anyone that's lost a parent or, any very, very close relative at a very young age will know that it is really hard sometimes to deal with the grief, especially when you know that the person is going to be dying, is slowly dying, or even rapidly so. And then there's a different kind of grief that comes when it's very sudden, when you don't expect someone to be gone, and then they just are, and you don't know how to go about your life without them. The latter is something I dealt with, but I really appreciated how the former was really expressed well in this. This is a book that is not easy to get through, so it is heavily trigger warned for obviously death of a family member and grief and loss and depression, and there's so much that goes on with this book that is so beautifully done, but it is not for the faint of heart. So definitely, if you're gonna read this, make sure you're in a really good headspace to handle it, because I was in a great headspace to read it, and I sobbed for probably 2 hours after I finished this book. The next and final book that I read for Wheel of D20 was The Burning Bridge by John Flanagan. This is book 2 in the Ranger's Apprentice series, another series that I remember fondly growing up, having a lot of friends read that I never got to read myself. I will say that this one was a little slow. It was a 4 to 5 stars for me. I liked the idea of this, but the middle of the story was just really, really slow, so I did feel like I lost a lot of information. But the ending of this, the battle that goes on at the end of this, was chef's kiss, amazing, so much fun. This is a series, though, that I question whether or not it's really considered middle grade, because I thought for the longest time that this series was a middle grade series. Now, the main character is like 16 years old in this, so I would also be willing to bet that this is something of like a very old YA style, because this is a series I remember, like I said, being around when I was in middle school, in very late elementary school, so in that like mid-2000s, early 2010s range, and I just feel like that this was not necessarily the middle grade I was thinking it was going to be, because there were some really heavy things brought up in this that I do not think a middle grade reader would be accustomed to, at least from what I understand now of middle grade. Next, I ended up reading the third book in the Patternist series by Octavia E. Butler, which was Clay's Ark. This is my least favorite of this series so far. This is also a read-along that is being hosted by my friend Bree from Bree Cherie Reads, and we are reading Octavia E. Butler's work, as much of it as we can within this year, and I don't know, this one was really interesting. This one is a much more sci-fi based story that involves a mutating, very kind of like Resident Evil-esque kind of thing, where in this story you have this father who has a set of twins who basically get kidnapped by this group of people who have this infection that is likely alien that one of the characters ended up getting because of reasons, I don't want to spoil too much of it, but it's a very fascinating story in theory. But I felt that it was way too quickly done. Everything happens within less than 200 pages, and it was very much a whiplash, and I felt so disoriented by the end of it. I don't really understand how it connects to everything else as of now, but I still have time before the live show even is for this book, so it is entirely possible that at the live show somebody will talk about it and I will be able to put the pieces together. But when reading this, I could not really understand how exactly there was a tie to the other books in this series, other than the fact that in book 2, which was Mind of My Mind, we had a character that was named Clay that, could have been the reason for the Clay's Ark thing that was talked about in this book. And I don't know, just something about this did not really sit well with me. I think, like I said, it was really great in theory, but in execution, not so much. It was just not, it wasn't it for me personally. And then finally, the last book I ended up reading in March at the very end of the month was the Zora Neale Hurston book for March, which was Jonah's Gourdvine. Now, this I also don't think it really hit for me. I feel like this was just not the book for me. I don't really understand why John, the main character, had to be the way he was. I just don't like him. This is a book where I thought I was going to really like the main character and I was going to like him all the way through, and bad decision after bad decision that he knew was bad. He irks me. He irks me to no end. Like, irks me so much that I couldn't really find myself enjoying this book because I just didn't want to continue with him. I did not want to deal with him anymore, and I think he deserved to rot in hell. That is the long and short of it, truthfully. It was fine. The writing was, you know, just okay. It wasn't anything spectacular for me personally. I feel like, again, the language is a thing I'm still trying to get a hold of. Like, it didn't impact the way that the story was being told because it really was like, it was a lot more dialogue than it was narration, which was very long-winded dialogue. It was very, like, I don't know, there was a lot of stuff going on with it that, again, I feel like this is something where it's just, because it's so much older, it's harder for me to wrap my head around what's going on in some of these stories, which is not a knock on Zora at all. It is more so of me, my inability to understand anything that's going on. Like, I got the gist of the story. I understood what happened. I hate John as a character. I think that he, again, needs to rot in hell, but this just didn't hit for me the way I wanted it to. And I am kind of sad about that, but at the same time, like I said before, not everything can be a winner. But with that, that is the end of my March wrap-up. So like I said, I got through a good lot of books. I beat the Wheel of D20 in March, first off, which was amazing. I did not expect that to happen, but I also got some really good reads in. I found some really good things. I was surprised by a few things that I read. It was overall just a really good month, and I think that I finally have gotten out of this, like, slumpy mood that I was starting to go into, and I feel like I can take on my April TBR with no worries. So thank you guys so much for joining me in this video. If you guys did enjoy it, please do give it a big thumbs up. And if you haven't already and you'd like to be and would like to see more content like this, go ahead and hit that button down below and subscribe to become an Owlette in our flock. And I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye, guys!